All right, everybody, welcome to the Employer Content Show, part of the Talent Insight series brought to you by HireWell and Before You Apply. I'm your host, James Hornick. Joining me is my co-host from Before You Apply, Nate. It's been so long, I forgot about the whole nicknames gag. Guggia. Oh, and he's got the mug.
I still got the mug. 2 years.
I got one here somewhere.
Yeah, man.
That's awesome.
Hey, this is fun. Yeah.
I remember when I used to give those out back when I need to start my promotions again.
They're hot items.
We'll actually get back to that. We'll tie that back in at the end of the conversation here.
Okay.
Before we start, check out all of our episodes on HireWell's Talent Insights, talentinsights.hirewell.com. Today's episode, I had to go back. It's been so long. This is episode 27. I guess we're calling it for right now, What the Hell is Recruiting Enablement? But we'll see where the conversation goes. Maybe that's an accurate title or not. So,
okay.
All right. So what we wanted to first kind of kick off is we did one of those LinkedIn audio chats. This was maybe a week ago.
Yeah. 2 weeks ago. Like yeah. Friday.
Good chat, terrible feature on LinkedIn. I think I'm bailing on that platform in terms of like their audio feature. They just give no support in terms of trying to build like a regular audience or anything, but the discussion was solid. Anyways, enablement assets. And I think you had a better term for these, explainer assets for recruiters, just to make their job easier. And why don't you explain what these are and how recruiting can be made easier by having them?
Yeah. Okay. So I think about it this way. The kind of like the prompt for me is if you find yourself doing too much back and forth or answering the same question over and over and over again with a candidate, with a customer, whoever your audience is, just make an asset that explains what you're trying to communicate and that like answers a lot of these questions that people have. I started doing it myself. I found that like with some customers of ours, they had some like key questions over and over again. And so what I did was I just turned them into posts on LinkedIn and I put them on my newsletter and I had a URL and a place to, now all of a sudden, like I had an asset when somebody asked me like, how do you think about analytics, for example? Like I already wrote it out in detail with tons of context and I would just send it to them. And every time somebody would just write me back and go like, oh, thank you. This is really helpful. And so with some of our customers, we started doing this for the recruiters where we would talk to their recruiters and we'd go like, hey, where in the process with a candidate are you kind of getting blocked or finding yourself writing the same message over and over again or doing too much like async back and forth? Mm-hmm. They tell us and we go, okay, let's just like turn that into this asset that like enables the process. It just like unlocks the process. It eliminates friction. It makes getting to a productive conversation easier. Yeah. And that was kind of like the starting point and like the thinking through it.
So what's funny about this is that this is the reason why I was recruiting enablement, that the term already exists. You had to Google it. It's been out there. We're not the first one to kind of use that phrase, but it's still not used. I've never heard a recruiter use it, right? Sales enablement is basically what's kind of taken off of. I'm shocked by how many people don't know what sales enablement is either. You know, I've had this kind of conversation with people. Salespeople out there will know. It's proposals, it's slide decks, it's follow-up items, it's anything that helps make a sale. And what's crazy to me is that how is this not more commonplace in the recruiting space? How do you not already have everything you need to kind of sell Now, some places do have some of these assets, right? Mm-hmm. But the amount of, I'm going to go on a limb and say the amount of double work and repetitive work that recruiters have to do is like infinitely more than salespeople, because salespeople actually have people dedicated to this. They have their sales enablement leads at like a lot of companies in charge of this kind of stuff. Yeah. But it's another example of how like just recruiting takes a back seat in terms of importance to like revenue generation, which on some level I understand, and some level it's still kind of crazy because it's the same concepts. You know what I mean? It's not that hard to do. Yeah. But breaking these out, if we want to kind of do that in some solid examples, because this is one of these things is kind of next level we talked about. So basic bitch level, bottom line, like job descriptions and benefit sheets. Okay.
Good term.
Yeah. So yes, that's recruiting enablement, but it's also really lame and doesn't actually like sell anybody. Like no one gets up and excited because they read a job description. Like you have to have that. You know what I mean? That's not like an optional thing. But that's kind of like your basic level of what would be kind of like a recruiting enablement item. Mm-hmm. The second thing, I'm pretty sure you told me to do this actually, and then we did it, the FAQ.
Yeah.
We might have done a whole show on this. I have to look back. Okay. Long story short, frequently asked questions. It doesn't sound like it's anything amazing, but I'm telling you it is. By simply having your recruiting team write down every single question they get from candidates, and then putting all those into one place and then one by one answering all those questions. So like anything someone would ever want to know about your company that they're going to ask you can literally now be an email. Mm-hmm. It should be on your website. It can be posted on social media to drive interest, but it could be literally anything that's kind of come up in the interview process or coming up in the interview process, typically going to ask. There's no reason not to do it. Like, you're getting these questions all the time, and you save yourself so much time and effort, and you have to compare yourself to like the next company who doesn't have it posted.
Oh, it did.
You could say don't walk in the room as many times as you want, but it still happens.
That was one of those news anchor moments. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. Sorry about that. I think we should leave it in. Yeah. Okay. So here's what I've discovered from kind of like being on the inside of how this stuff happens is that it feels like in-house recruiting teams are more than sales teams are doing their kind of their own thing at an individual level, which means that like one recruiter could be sending like one type of message or a tweaked version of a templated message that went to the entire team. Another recruiter is doing another thing. Everybody, you know, there's like biases towards tools. And then like, depending on like how much experience an individual recruiter has, they might be kind of stuck in their ways. So there's like more like misalignment in recruiting than there probably is in sales. Sales seems like a lot more structured, especially when it comes to like sales management and sales leadership and all that kind of stuff, right? It's like, it's a lot more structured. And then the other thing too, is that all of the, like these types of things that we're talking about are seen as like, I wish we had these, but we have no idea how to actually make them or like the time or the resources to make them, which is something we like. I mean, I've hammered that like a lot of times, but let me like, can I kind of tell you the process we went through just to like,
sure, go for it.
Okay. It's like, it's a very simple process. It's not easy though, in some ways. So it started with, and here's a cool thing for this like specific customer I'm thinking of, we actually worked with their agency recruiter, right? So the company is a customer of ours, but they outsource their recruiting to an agency. We worked with their agency recruiter. The reason, like, to me, that is so important is because a lot of times people think that you can't do stuff like this with agencies. Like, it has to be like an internal thing. And that's actually not true. You just have to have like the right relationship between agency and company in order to do it. This time it worked out extremely well. So we got on a call with the recruiter. We said, okay, are you being blocked? He said, you know, a lot of times candidates, before they schedule a call with me, they want to know, what does the interview process look like? I don't really have any way. We don't have that documented anywhere. You know, it's kind of different depending on the role and whatever. And I said, all right, like we said, okay, like let's create this asset for you as soon as we can. So we did. So he downloaded the entire interview process for us. We took a ton of notes. And then it becomes the job of whoever the creative person is, whoever like is going to turn this into an asset. It's their job to take all of that information. And all of that information is everything from like, what is every individual step, who's involved in each individual step, and then what does each individual step entail? That's a lot of information, but you got to figure out a way to take all of that information and then condense it down into an asset that is like no more than a page and a half, maybe, you know, where it's like, let's say in this case, it's for like, you know, pretty senior software engineers that they're recruiting, where an engineer can look at this and go like, boom, I get it. I know who I'm talking to. Here's links to those people. I can do my research. We included some like also useful links at the end of it that, you know, go to like some relevant blog posts about their funding and about benefits and stuff like that. And we just created this one thing now that just, and we did it in a Google Doc. Like it wasn't even fancy. They're not hosting it on their website or anything. And now all of a sudden this recruiter has this link, which is kind of like this magic link that explains a whole bunch of stuff that candidates have, that then again, like going back to what I was saying, unlocks that their ability now to go, okay, I know what I'm getting myself into.
This description of the recruiting process could have been an email, like as simple as that. Like, it's the same as because it's similar. And this is because I when you mentioned this to me last week, I loved it. I kind of wrote this post about it. What I like about it too, and I guess the idea of documenting your interview process and using that as a selling point to attract more candidates or to streamline your recruitment process with candidates to get them through the funnel better. I don't know many places. I mean, I guess we'll put it this way. every time we do an intake call with a client on a new requirement, that's one of the three things we always hit on is interview process, and it's making sure we know exactly what it is, make sure we're aligned with it, make sure it makes sense, make sure we can explain it to candidates, and make sure we can also advise if they need to tweak it a bit based upon what else we're seeing in the market. It's something every recruiter should do. We obviously, it's something that we document, so when we can kind of explain it to candidates.
Yeah.
But the reality is that it doesn't always pan out that way, because sometimes companies' processes are a little more theoretical. Like this is how they think it's going to go down versus like a hardened process they've actually kind of like created, realize it works, make it repeatable, get everybody on board, and it's not a criticism. It's just that if you're hiring for something you never hired for before,
sure,
you have an idea of what you're going to do, may not exactly pan out that way, but the more you can do to kind of reduce that level of disconnects that might happen, the better, because candidates got other things they're looking at. They're going to think you're a joker if it's way out of whack with what you told them up front. I mean, it's just kind of human nature to not take you seriously if like what you told them one day is not how it panned out. What I realize is, by going through this exercise, it can force you to streamline your processes, right? If you've determined that we're going to post our interview process on our website and use it as a follow-up item with everyone we talk to, so everyone knows exactly where you are, you have to actually make a no bullshit process. You can't just kind of wing it, you know what I mean? If you're going to put your name on it and say, this is how we go, you have to make sure it's real. Secondly, in order to do that, you have to make sure everyone in your organization is accountable and on board. Another big pain point in the recruiting process is maybe it's the hiring manager changing their mind, or maybe it's someone on their team who wasn't really kind of bought in, like they're not really reachable for these interviews, they kind of push this off. I believe that by stating this is what we're going to do, we believe so much in our interview process, we're going to use it to attract talent, because it will. Yeah. By letting people know up front, this is what our process is. There's no disconnect. This is how we kind of do things. You can also use it to kind of send to people after the fact, like you mentioned. It would force you to get your shit together, to actually like commit to a process and to commit to everyone in your organization sticking to that process.
That's interesting. So it's like using documentation to like build a process, streamline a process, make a process better. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you commit to doing something, like you've set a 90-day goal, this is what we're driving towards. No matter what part of business or life you're talking about, like you're more likely to hit it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think you can use it, especially if it's something that, because it can do all three things in terms of like cleaning up the process and committing to it, getting everyone on board, and then obviously kind of attracting talent with it. Now, there's challenges there, because I think what you were saying with it is having the agency recruiter they were working with have these assets available to them is a good start, right? That's like when you talk about like recruiting enablement, that's giving that recruiter the ability to like have stuff they can send to people, and that might be different for every position they work on. I do think if they're going to take it to the level of putting it on your site, which is even more powerful, then you have to make sure like there's,
yes,
you can explain away deviations when only one person saw it. When it's the whole world's looking at it and they're applying to you because of it, then like you can't half-ass it. Like it has to be real, Yep.
Yeah, good point.
So I do think and I guess the other thing I want to be fair about it is that like the frequently asked questions, which we did a show on this before, like that's a light lift. And it's extremely powerful. That's like, write down all the questions you got, answer them all. It really is that simple. It's an exercise where, each recruiter on your team, it's 20 minutes of their time, send it to somebody. It's an hour of their time answering all the questions, put it on the website, you're done, and it's going to work.
Yeah.
This is obviously, if you want to do it like the first level in terms of just having a good handout on a per role basis recruiter can use, maybe that's a little simpler. But in terms of doing it well, like that's a bigger lift. You got to commit to fixing your interview process. You got to commit to having an interview process. You got to commit to get everyone on board with the interview process. And the thing is, these are things you should want. This isn't crazy talk, It is a bit aspirational, because I do understand that hiring is hard. And it's smaller companies might be hard to get these stuff done, but this is what you should strive towards. There might be certain roles you're hiring for where it doesn't quite fit because it's outside of your norm. Like this would work very well if you hire a lot of salespeople, right? And if you're one of those organizations that has like a class every other month for like a new hire class, like you should have this for that. But if you're making your first ever hire in demand generation or DEI or something you don't hire for often, I can see that you don't really, I think we can admit you don't know what you're doing in these hires. That's okay. Yeah. But I can see that being a hesitation, but that shouldn't stop you from wanting to like go down this path anyway.
Yeah. I don't know. The biggest takeaway for me and I guess for anybody, is like this theme of, again, is like, if you find yourself doing something repeatedly, or you find your target person having the same questions, being blocked by the same lack of information, whatever, it's like, just turn it into something that can answer that question, so you're not doing the same thing over and over. I don't know. There's like, there's so much like qualitative stuff here. It's like the level of empathy that shows. It shows candidates that like, you get it. Shows that you lean more towards transparency, which then is like, that is a positive light on your brand. It just like, as you do more and more of these things, it just, because I think, like, again, we've said this a lot of times, the bar is so low.
Yeah.
That if you just start doing this stuff, and like, don't ever think that it has to be perfect, or that the audience cares as much as you do, because they don't. They don't care about fancy branding. They don't care about like overly polished anything. It's like, they just like want the information, and providing them with the information. If you're being compared against another company and you're the one providing the information, even at like a minimal level, and the other company's not.
If you post your interview by that, I mean, like, you make a post on LinkedIn that says, what happens when you apply to XYZ company? Here are the actual steps. Here's what you can expect. That's your post versus the people posting like pictures of their holiday party. You know what I mean? Like,
For sure.
One of those is like a real thing people actually want to know. The other one is not. So
totally. Yeah. Okay.
I was going to transition because there's another topic I want to talk about here.
Okay.
Time on page. Getting into this is another kind of marketing concept, kind of repurposing to recruiting. We might get a little bit out there on this one, but you brought this up, and I think this kind of relates, because I think the way this came up was like, you're talking about there's a frequently asked questions, or what happens when you apply, and there's a recruitment process outline on your website. How do you track that to see how interested people are, or who's interacting with it, and all those types of things?
Yeah. Okay. So time on page. Okay. I talk openly, or I post openly, whatever, it's not talking, but about how I change my mind on stuff. I do. I've done it plenty of times, and like, I actually kind of enjoy when that happens. This is one of those times. I used to be I'd go pretty hard on the fact that when it comes to content, that analytics are more or less bullshit. Like, analytics don't tell the story, but marketers rely on analytics to report back on the success of something. And I'm like, that's not the case with content. If there's just like way too many things, too many variables that you can't measure. It's all qualitative. Does a candidate say they like it or not? Did it help in the process? Yes or no? That kind of stuff is like, you get feedback.
The quick example to delineate that point for anyone who doesn't quite, if they're not following along, if you take someone who regularly creates content that's actually insightful and interesting and maybe very technical, or something that gets really detailed and has a very loyal following, but is kind of niche, versus someone who literally just posts memes all day and stuff that everyone agrees with and kid pics. The second example is going to get way more engagement, way more audience, way more. The first example is going to have a much smaller audience and smaller reach, but is going to actually like get people on board to buy their product or join their company or whatever.
Right.
That's why it's such a massive difference, and why, like, when people talk about analytics, like when they're saying analytics are bullshit for content, it's because they really are. It's more about the value that gets you to the result, as opposed to just clicks. So.
Yes. Yeah. And so, within the context of like the stuff that we do, we create content for recruiting teams. So a lot of our customers will have asked us, over the years about analytics. And we're kind of like, I don't know what, you're the one using the content. We're the ones creating it. You're the ones using it. What kind of feedback are you getting? That's the real story there, Yeah, for recruiting teams, for in-house recruiting teams, that's not always the answer they want, because they're just like generally not good at qualitative data. But we started looking, we do have an analytics tool on our pages, and we started looking at it. One thing that we realized was that it's this whole like quality and intent thing. And we realized that like the time on page that candidates were spending on the stuff that we created was extremely high. So we started thinking about this in terms of like, whoa, okay, quality is like a big deal in recruiting, especially in tech, which is the sector that we work in. And how do you know if you create an asset, let's say in this case, an enablement asset, how do you know that it's working, that candidates even care outside of them telling you when you have a conversation? So we're like, if they're spending a lot of time consuming this content, which you can measure, that's a good indicator that the stuff you're making is working, that people actually are spending time there from just like purely from like a metrics or from like a numbers perspective. And so we look at two things right now that we're really diving into. One is unique users that go to a specific page, which is an asset in this case, and then the time that they're spending on that page, the average time. And the interesting thing, and this is kind of like a Chris Walker thing that he's talked about like in the past, which is when you start doing things in a certain way, volume like the intention is actually for volume to go down because you're narrowing more and more in on the target person that you're actually looking to bring in. And in this case, what we saw was like unique users were like on the lower side, but time on page was extremely high. We're like, okay, that's pretty telling because in our case, we create things for recruiters to send in outbound messages, which means that the only people who are seeing that content are people that recruiters have already filtered to be like, at least on the surface level, qualified. So if you see like a unique user and you see 7 minutes time on page, that's a good indicator that the right person is spending a lot of time consuming your stuff. And so that's how we started thinking about time on page. The one thing that I'm interested, that I would love to A/B test, which now we're starting to get a little bit more out there, is like in that play, when you're going like, let's say sniper style, and you're sending a link to an asset directly to a targeted candidate in a message, that's one thing. How does that time on page compare to posting that asset on social and having a large audience that you cannot control view that asset? And would one be far greater than the other? Would they compare? I don't really know, but I would love to see the comparison for general audience versus targeted audience.
I was also thinking of like on an individual level, right? So I'd be curious because, I'm not a marketing guru, but I dabble, and we're ourselves implementing HubSpot right now, which has a lot of kind of tracking ability to tell you like who's actually coming back to your page, kind of lead scoring, showing intent by, visiting this or that page. And we're like most companies, like this is all stuff that marketers know, right? This is a lot of people know how to do this type of stuff. It's in terms of figuring out like who's most likely to buy. So your outbound salespeople can like follow up with them more often, that type of thing. So it's just whatever, it's just intelligence, right? But the technology exists, the way to kind of track people like this. But what about applying that to recruiting and kind of what you're talking about? If there's, 10 candidates you're looking at for a job, or maybe you're down to your last 3 or 4, and you can tell that like two of them specifically have been coming back to a lot of these questions, and they've been going through the interview process. They're rereading the documents. They're going through a lot of this stuff. Whereas the other 2 like never bothered to click on any of your follow-up items. You know what I mean? How does that, I guess, can you pull some intelligence out of that? Are you going to be more drawn to the people that are clearly showing more interest in you? Like, so there's one that is also, it's like, is an indicator people aren't the ones who aren't clicking on your stuff and following up and reading through it. Is that more of an indicator that they're not a fit, or you shouldn't like continue, but like, have you not done your job with them? Have you not sold them on this? You haven't gotten them excited enough? Like, is it more of an indicator that you had more work to do that you kind of fell flat on? Like, I don't know anyone doing this, like we know people who are like, the first time we talk about this discussion, like documenting interview process is one of these things, but using these more kind of individual based tracking mechanisms in a recruitment process, the technology exists.
Oh, it totally does.
It's all out there.
It's not even complex. Like we use Plausible. We're actually like in the process of creating like a custom dashboard because we want to get better. This is something we're like really into. So we're going to like invest in it. But yeah, I mean, the tools exist. They're super cheap. All you really need to do is like going back to enablement assets. You create it, you host it somewhere. And if it's hosted somewhere, which is your website, then it has tracking associated with it. And you can start paying attention to like how much time you could you could go, hey, recruiters, how are you using this? We're sending it to candidates, blah, 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 when they have questions, whatever the context is. Okay. Yeah. And then then you have the use case. And then you look at like, how much time are people spending on these individual pages? And you start to know what's working and what isn't. Then there's like this qualitative piece as people start getting into the process, and they're like, oh, the things you provided me with made this easier. maybe more attracted to your company, whatever it might be. You start piecing this stuff together, but like, I don't know, maybe it's just me that I find this like so interesting, but I look at the stuff that like that recruiting teams or marketing teams want to measure. And then I look at stuff like this and I go, there's a big difference, because there's like behavior of people, and we're all trying to measure the behavior of people, which is really, really hard. And I don't think that somebody clicking on something or showing that a link got clicked on enough times, I mean, that doesn't show anything. It just shows that like it was clickable. But if somebody, especially if we're talking about hard to hire people who you're primarily sourcing, if they're spending a good amount of time on something, that means like you're doing something right, because those people.
Yeah. Well, especially another way to think about it too, because you didn't call this out specifically, but I know it's what you guys do. But if you got video assets, if you've got if you're working with an organization where the company has their hiring managers are on video talking about what they're doing, and you can tell that certain candidates have watched 10, 15, 20 minutes of different hiring managers and you know who those people are, and you also know the ones who didn't go through that. I mean, that's also very telling in terms of the effectiveness of it, who's clearly the most interested, and where you have the most work to do with who's not interested.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I look at time as like this big indicator of intent. And I think that that's like in marketing, intent is like the golden ticket, right? It's like what everybody's trying to figure out is like, how do we get people who have a lot of intent? Time, to me, at least within this context, is like the best indicator that I can think of right now.
Yeah. Do you want to go one more? The last thing I want to talk about is people, but maybe the transition here to the third topic, which this is the point of the show where Nate and I are just going to complain about stuff. People's unwillingness to try stuff like this out, or try anything like this out, was on full display a couple of weeks ago. So the background was that Joel Alge from our team, famous recruiter in LinkedIn internet, he started playing around with TikTok just for fun, right? And Joel's got, I don't know, 150,000 LinkedIn connections, and he has, at the time, I think 30,000 TikTok connections, although I think he's up to 50,000 last I asked him. And I think here's what I have to make clear. He was not advertising a job. He was not saying, apply to this. He was not saying, come check us out. He was just shit posting. He was just making a funny video. That's it, right? The same videos he puts on LinkedIn. So it's like apples to apples, just making like a recruiter post, having fun with it, whatever. When you put stuff on LinkedIn, I mean, we do get people reaching out to us like, hey, I saw Joel's video, I'm interested in you guys, or, it happens. When he did it on TikTok, where he had 1/5 the size of the audience, it basically blew up our entire inbound. So we went from getting, 1 to 2 people a day mentioning, hey, I saw some posts Joel made, to like 100. Our page views on our own website were up like over 1,000%. It just absolutely friggin' exploded, which made me realize, okay, there's something happening on this site that's just different than LinkedIn. When you've got like 1-for-1, similar content, same person, smaller audience, but you're getting exponentially higher traffic and interest driven by that. There's clearly something happening on TikTok that is just capturing people's imaginations, and then maybe it's a motivated audience, maybe it's age group, whatever. But when you see just eye-popping numbers where 1,000 or 2,000% increase in traffic, whatever it was something completely bonkers, and you're getting, the same, like considerably more inbound driven from something like that, it's worth investigating. That was the entire purpose of what I was saying. It's worth taking a look. There's something here, you should figure it out. Yeah. The amount of people responding back, resisting, and just shitting on the whole thing. I mean, there wasn't a ton, but there were some. Like some people like right away are like, that's pretty cool. But then you get others, they're just like, yeah, but what was the quality of the inbound? How many people did you place off this? Like, I'm just like, are you fucking kidding me?
Or I saw some that were like data privacy stuff. Wasn't there people concerned about data privacy with TikTok?
I am too. I'm actually on board with that. Like I am concerned about the privacy of TikTok, but
for sure,
as a marketing channel, like when you see, I mean, it wasn't even a test. It wasn't even like him going out and saying, hey, I want to try to find people for a job. Just people just started hitting us up,
Hey, were those people who wanted to work at your company? Or
some of them, yes.
And
some of them were people some of them were technical people. We actually got several like people submitted to clients, some developers.
I was wondering about that.
It came through. But, I have to admit, by the sheer volume of it, yes, there were a lot of people who reached out who didn't fit anything. They didn't fit us. They didn't think anything else. It was a lot. But the counterpoint is that's literally all inbound traffic. You're always going to get flooded with people who don't fit roles you're working on. I was not surprised, but I was slightly annoyed in that people, like, I was not advocating this is the future and that I even straight up said, we don't have this figured out. We don't have a strategy here. This is not something we can execute on right now. But just by the sheer volume of interest that it drove was bonkers. And this is worth taking a look at and seeing like how you could use it.
Mm-hmm.
But people taking it 3 steps further and upset that I wasn't able to clearly delineate what the business results were and like how spot on the applications were. I'm like, there was no job. They weren't applying to anything in particular. Like we weren't advertising for anything in particular. I think it was a funny video. Like it speaks to the resistance of people to get outside their box of what they currently do and not wanting to admit that in the future, a year down the road, 2 years down the road, there might be a better way of doing this job that people haven't figured out yet. People don't like thinking of things in those terms. They just want to throw up resistance that, no, this is stupid because it's not targeted enough or it's not, whatever. So,
you know, what's like, what's super cool is that the person who did this was a recruiter.
Yeah.
Who just did it.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea of like any of this stuff having to be this like
corporate driven
goal initiative where like a bunch of people have to get in the room to make decisions and approve it. And like, what's the messaging going to be? And blah, blah, blah. Like all that kind of stuff is just like, it drives me crazy. It's like Joel just was like, fuck it. I'm going to test TikTok out and like see what happens. And like just posted something and then you reported on it. And like, it's just, it happened so fast. And it was like, we need more of that. There's just like, there's just too many damn blockers.
But that's why tying this back, the reason why I wanted to bring this up, because I didn't want to talk about TikTok for an extended period of time, but the other things we talked about here today. So talking about like creating recruitment ads, putting your interview process on your website as a way of selling candidates, getting them interested / having less follow-up items for your recruiters. 1, 2, figuring out how to like time on page or using the amount of time that people interact with your career site because you have better assets on it. There's things to interact with. To determine like who's highly interested and who you have work to do with. These are like the first concept is easier than the second, but these are both achievable with modern technology. And these are things that work in the sales enablement and marketing realms already. So really we're talking about things that exist, but no one really does in recruiting. But the resistance that these ideas are going to have based upon the experiment with the fucking TikTok post, like I'm telling you, there's so many people who are just going to think these ideas are stupid, even though they're proven to work in other forums just because there's so many recruiters out there, man, who just don't want to get out of their own way and don't want to admit there might be a different or better thing on the horizon.
Man,
you got anything else? Is that the end of the show?
That's the end. We're just gonna drop it right there.
All right.
Yeah, that was a good ending.
Yeah, we'll leave the clip of. Was that your wife who walked in on you, or I didn't see it?
Was.
I don't. Yeah, I've never met your wife, so I'm just assuming. But it's walking in on you, and the whole like shocked face. Oh my god,
We'll leave it in.
Like 2020 news person clips of the kid walking in. All right, everyone out there, that's a wrap for the Employer Content Show. If you want to hear more of what Nate and I have to say, we could post the after show video somewhere of us just talking shit. If you want to hear more of what Nate and I have to say, you can view all of our episodes on HireWell Talent Insights, talentinsights.hirewell.com. You can also subscribe to the HireWell channel on YouTube and the Talent Insights podcast on Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify. Nate, thanks again as always. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, buddy.
Everyone out there, see you soon.
Bye-bye.